Laos is one of the quietest countries on Earth. Eight million people, a land of forested mountains and slow brown rivers where the day begins before dawn with a line of barefoot monks, and time seems to move at the pace of the water. Few outsiders can find it on a map. Fewer still could tell you a single thing that has happened here. And yet, more bombs were dropped on this quiet country than on any other place in the history of the world. More than 2 million tons of ordnance. More than fell on Germany and Japan combined across the whole of the Second World War. All of it on a landlocked nation the size of a single American state. A country that officially was never even at war. Both things are true at the same time. This is one of the calmest, least touched corners of the planet. And it is the most heavily bombed country, per capita, that has ever existed. The silence you find here is not the silence of a place where nothing happened. It is the silence that comes after. So how does a country end up at the center of a war the world agreed not to see? And what is it becoming now, half a century later, as a new power moves quietly into the same hills? To understand any of it, you have to begin with a single fact, the one printed on the cover of every guidebook, the one that sounds like nothing at all. Laos is the only landlocked country in Southeast Asia. Every one of its neighbors touches the sea, Thailand to the west, Myanmar to the northwest, China to the north, Vietnam to the east, Cambodia to the south. 5 countries press in on every side, and not 1 mile of the Lao border meets open water. On the page, that reads like a small geographic curiosity, a trivia answer, the kind of fact you forget the moment you've heard it. But landlocked is not the same as isolated. A coast is an edge, a place where a country ends and the open ocean begins. A landlocked country has no edge. It is all middle. And the middle of mainland Southeast Asia, it turns out, is the one piece of ground that every surrounding power has needed to control. For 1,000 years, Laos has been the corridor, the land you have to cross to get from one empire to the next, the buffer between giants who would rather not share a border. And a corridor, by its nature, belongs to whoever is passing through it. That is the thread that runs through everything here. The temples and the kingdoms, the river and the elephants, the bombs still buried in the soil, and the railway being driven through the mountains right now. This is the story of the country in the middle. Begin with the land itself, because the land explains almost everything that follows. Roughly 70% of Laos is mountain. Steep, forested ridges, folded one behind the next, stretching to a horizon that never seems to flatten. The Annamite Range walls off the entire eastern border with Vietnam. The highest peak, Pho Bia, rises past 2,800 meters. Between the ranges sit a handful of high plateaus, the rolling grasslands of Sieng Kuang in the north, the limestone country of Camuan in the center, the fertile volcanic soil of the Balavan in the south, and below them, a thin ribbon of lowland along the country's western edge. Life here is governed by the rain. For half the year the monsoon comes off the sea, the country does not touch, swelling the rivers and flooding the paddies. For the other half, the land dries and waits. In the narrow valleys where the water gathers, the people grow rice. Not the long-grain rice of the lowlands to the south, but a sticky rice, rolled in the hand and eaten by the fistful, a grain so central to the Lao that they call themselves, only half in jest, the children of sticky rice. Everything in this country bends around two things: the rain that comes and the river that carries it away. For most of human history, this terrain made Laos almost impossible to govern from the outside. The mountains are too steep to farm and too tangled to march an army through. Villages a few kilometers apart, separated by a single ridge, could go a lifetime without meeting. Even today, there are valleys here that the road has never reached. That is why a question hangs over the whole country, and it is worth holding on to. If this land is so hard to cross, so broken and vertical and overgrown, why has it been fought over so relentlessly? Why would anyone want the corridor that no one can comfortably walk through? The answer is the thin ribbon of lowland and the river that runs along it. The Mekong is the spine of Laos. It rises far to the north on the Tibetan Plateau in China, and by the time it reaches Laos soil, it has become one of the great rivers of the world. It runs the length of the country, forming much of the border with Thailand, and almost everything that matters in Laos sits on its banks. The capital, the old royal city, the rice, the fish, the history. In a country with almost no flat ground, the Mekong's valley is the flat ground. It is the road where there are no roads, the field where the mountains allow a field, the single artery feeding a landlocked body. Strip away the river, and there is no Laos to speak of, only mountains. Which means the corridor everyone wanted was never really the mountains at all. It was the water. Follow that water upstream, into a bend where a smaller river joins it, and you arrive at the place that holds the soul of the country, Luang Prabang. It sits in a valley where the Mekong meets the Nam Khan, ringed by green hills, a small city of wooden houses and gilded temple roofs that catch the first light of the morning. For more than 600 years, this was the royal capital, the seat of kings, the spiritual heart of the Lao world. And for a place that has watched so much history pass through it, it is astonishingly, deliberately calm. Every morning, while it is still dark, the city performs a ritual it has performed for centuries. It is called the Tak Bat, the giving of alms. Before sunrise, the doors of more than 30 monasteries open, and hundreds of monks step out into the streets in single file, barefoot, silent, wrapped in robes the color of saffron and flame. They move along the same routes their predecessors have walked since the 14th century, when Buddhism first took root in this valley. And along those routes, the people of the city are already waiting, kneeling on the ground in the half-light, each with a basket of sticky rice, cooked before dawn, prepared the night before. As the monks pass, the people place a small handful of rice into each bowl. No words are exchanged. No eye contact is made. The monks do not thank them, and the people do not expect to be thanked. It is an exchange older than almost anything in the Western world, and it runs in both directions. The monks depend on this rice. It is the only food many of them will eat all day. The people depend on the giving. In this tradition, the more you give away, the wealthier in spirit you become. Look closely at the line of monks, and you will see, among the grown men, a great many children. Boys, some no older than 8 or 9, shaven-headed and wrapped in the same saffron. In Laos, the monastery has always been more than a place of prayer. For centuries, it was the school, the orphanage, the one road out of poverty for a village boy with no land and no prospects. A family that cannot feed all its sons sends one to the temple, where he will be clothed and taught and fed, and where, for a few years or for life, he becomes part of the oldest institution in the country. The discipline of the empty stomach until noon is learned young here. And like everything precious, the ceremony is now under a quieter kind of pressure. As word of the dawn rituals spread, the visitors came, and some of them came too close, lining the route with cameras, stepping into the procession, breaking the silence that was the whole point. The monks who once walked through their own sleeping city now sometimes walk through a crowd of strangers. The people of Luang Prabang ask only one thing of those who come to watch. To watch the way you would watch a prayer, because that is what it is. An outsider, watching for the first time, often makes the same mistake. They see the quiet, the slowness, the absence of hurry, and they read it as emptiness, as a place where nothing is happening, a backwater. But nothing here is empty. The quiet is the achievement. It is a way of living that has been chosen and defended and kept through invasions, through colonization, through a war that fell out of the sky. The stillness of Luang Prabang at dawn is not the stillness of a place that history forgot. It is the stillness of a place that decided again and again what it wished to remain. In 1995, the world formally recognized what the Lao had always known. Luang Prabang was named a World Heritage Site. Its temples, its French colonial villas, its wooden houses preserved as one of the best-kept old towns in Southeast Asia. Just upriver, carved into limestone cliffs above the Mekong, the Pak U caves hold thousands of small Buddha statues left by pilgrims over centuries, accumulating in the dark like offerings to the river itself. To understand why kings ruled from this exact bend in the river, you have to go back to the moment the country was born. In 1353, an exiled prince named Fa Ngum returns to the land of his birth at the head of an army. He has spent his youth in the Khmer court to the south, married a Khmer princess, and now he comes north to unite the scattered principalities of the Mekong Valley under a single crown. He succeeds. From this valley, he forges one of the largest kingdoms Southeast Asia has ever seen, and he gives it a name that tells you exactly how the Lao saw themselves. Lan Xang, the land of 1,000,000 elephants. It was not an idle boast. In that age, the elephant was the tank and the tractor and the throne all at once, a measure of a kingdom's wealth, its labor, and its power in war. To claim 1,000,000 elephants was to claim that this landlocked corridor, this country in the middle, was no one's buffer and no one's afterthought. It was a power in its own right. For 300 years, Lan Xang held. It reached its height in the 1600s, under a king whose reign is still remembered as a golden age. And then, as so often happens with kingdoms held together by a single strong hand, it came apart when that hand was gone. After the death of its last great king, the kingdom split into three: Luang Prabang in the north, Vientiane in the center, Champasak in the south. Three weaker pieces where there had been one strong whole. And weakness in a corridor is an invitation. The elephants, too, would not last. The land of 1 million elephants today holds only a few hundred wild ones, scattered through shrinking pockets of forest, pressed by logging and dams and the slow disappearance of the land they need. The name survives, the herds do not. It is one of the quieter losses in a country that has learned to carry many of them, a kingdom that named itself for an animal it could no longer protect. The three kingdoms that rose from the broken whole each left their mark on the land. In the center, on a wide bend of the Mekong, the city of Vientiane became the new seat of power. There, in the 1500s, a king named Setatirat raised a great golden stupa over what was said to be a relic of the Buddha himself. They call it Pa That Luang. Its tiers climb toward a gilded spire that burns in the afternoon sun, and over the centuries, it has been looted, ruined, and rebuilt more than once. Today, it is the single most important monument in the country, the image stamped on the national seal, the place where the identity of Laos is gathered into one shape of gold. Far to the south, in the kingdom of Champasak, the land holds something older still. At the foot of a mountain shaped, the ancients believed, like a sacred stone, stand the ruins of Wat Phu, a Khmer temple raised by the same civilization that would later build Angkor, its oldest stones laid before Angkor Wat existed at all. Long avenues of weathered sandstone climb the hillside toward a spring that has been considered holy for more than 1,000 years. When this temple was built, this land lay within the reach of the Khmer Empire to the south. The corridor, changing hands again, its sacred places inherited from whoever held it last. The south carries a gentler inheritance too. On the cool, fertile soil of the Bolivian plateau, the French planted coffee a century ago, and it grows there still, some of the finest in Asia, ripening in the volcanic earth between waterfalls that drop in white sheets through the forest. A bitter crop, left behind by an empire that became one of the few things this landlocked country could sell to the world. But all of it, the golden stupa, the Khmer ruins, the kingdoms and their kings, is young by the measure of this land. Long before Fan Gum, long before the first temple was raised or the first relic enshrined, something else was here. And to this day, no one is entirely sure what it was. On a windswept plateau in the north-central highlands, scattered across the grasslands in their thousands, stand enormous jars of solid stone. There are more than 2,000 of them, carved from sandstone and granite, hollowed out by hand, some small enough to sit inside, others 3 meters tall and weighing as much as 14 tons. They lie tilted and half sunk across the fields in no pattern anyone can read, as if a giant had set down 1,000 cups and walked away. The place has only one possible name: the Plain of Jars. They are old, older than the kingdom, older than the temples, carved sometime in the Iron Age, more than 2,000 years ago, by a people who left no writing, no monuments, and no name. For most of a century, the jars were one of archaeology's true enigmas. Local legend said they were the cups of giants made to brew rice wine for a victory feast. Scientists suspected something quieter and darker. In the 1930s, a French archaeologist named Madeleine Colani spent years among the jars, measuring, sketching, excavating. She found burned bone, teeth, fragments of the dead. And she proposed the theory that still stands today, that the jars were not for wine, but for the dead. Vessels in which bodies were placed to decompose before the bones were gathered and buried. A funerary landscape 2,000 years old spread across an entire plateau. Recent excavations have deepened the mystery rather than closing it. Buried among the jars, archaeologists have found glass beads and iron tools and ornaments that traveled here from astonishing distances. From India, from the kingdoms of Myanmar, from as far as Mesopotamia. This remote upland plain, it turns out, was not remote at all. 2,000 years ago, it sat on a trade route that bridged empires, threading the wealth of distant civilizations through these very hills. The corridor, even then. The country in the middle, even then. And here, the ancient story and the modern one collide on the very same ground. Because the plateau of the jars sits in a province called Xieng Kuang. And Xieng Kuang, 2,000 years after the jars were carved, became one of the most heavily bombed places on the face of the earth. The bombs did not spare the jars. Craters pocked the fields between them. Some jars were shattered outright, and much of the evidence that might have answered the oldest question, who made these and why, was itself destroyed from the air, blown apart before anyone could read it. To this day, only a handful of jar sites can be safely visited because the ground around the rest is still seeded with explosives that have not yet gone off. Think about what that means. The answer to a 2,000-year-old mystery may have survived intact until the 1960s, and then been erased by a war that had nothing to do with it. The past and the present buried in the same soil, one of them still waiting to kill. But that war is still ahead of us. To reach it, the river has more to show. The Mekong does not only carry boats and history, it carries one of the richest concentrations of life of any river on Earth. More than 1,100 species of fish live in its waters, a diversity surpassed only by the Amazon and the Congo, and packed into a far smaller basin. The river feeds tens of millions of people across 6 countries, and in Laos, where the sea is a rumor and the mountains forbid most farming, the fish of the Mekong are not a luxury. They are survival itself. And in the deep pools and rapids, the river hides giants. The Mekong giant catfish is one of the largest freshwater fish in the world. It can grow to 3 meters and weigh as much as a grown man and a half, close to 300 kilograms, with a vast, slow, scaleless body and a face like something from before history. It eats no other fish. It glides through the deepest channels, migrating hundreds of kilometers to spawn, asking nothing of the world but to be left to its enormous, gentle drifting. To the people of the river, it was never only a fish. For generations, the great catfish was held sacred, a spirit of the Mekong, caught only after the proper prayers were offered, its appearance read as a sign. The fishermen who hunted it did so with ceremony, asking the river's permission before they set their nets, treating the largest of the catch with a reverence that bordered on worship. It was the river made flesh. To lose it is not only to lose a species, it is to lose a god that the Mekong had carried since before the First Kingdom rose on its banks. It is nearly gone. Overfishing took most of it. Its numbers have collapsed by more than 80% in living memory, and now the river itself is being walled. Every dam built across the Mekong is another wall the catfish cannot pass, cutting it off from the spawning grounds it has used for longer than humans have farmed. A fish that has swum this river since before the jars were carved may not outlast the century. It is not alone down there. Where the Mekong tumbles over a wide stretch of waterfalls near the Cambodian border, lives the Irrawaddy dolphin, round-headed, half-smiling, a freshwater dolphin found in only a few rivers on Earth. In this stretch, perhaps a few dozen remain. In one small pool on the border, the count has fallen to single figures. They are dying in fishing nets and starving as the dams change the river beneath them, and there are too few young ones surviving to replace the old. The river that made the country may be undone, fish, by the same hunger for power that runs through the rest of this story. Hold on to that thought, it comes back. And the forests above the river still keep their own secrets. Somewhere in the dense, wet mountains of the Annamite Range moves an animal so rarely seen that it was unknown to science until 1992. The Sowler, a slender, dark creature with two long, straight horns, sometimes called the Asian unicorn. It has almost never been photographed alive. No outsider has reported seeing one in the wild in years. It may already be among the rarest large animals on the planet, a ghost in the green, persisting at the very edge of existence in the same mountains that hide so much else. These hills are still giving up new life too. Since the late 1990s, scientists have catalogued more than 2,000 species across the greater Mekong region that no one had ever recorded. A color-changing frog, a fish with fangs, creatures that seem invented. Laos remains one of the last places where the natural world has not finished surprising us. And the land that hides them is, in its quieter moments, simply beautiful. Above Luang Prabang, a river drops through the forest in a staircase of pools, each one a startling, milky turquoise, the color of dissolved limestone catching the light. They are called the Quang Si Falls, and the water is cold enough to take your breath. Farther south, near a bend in another river, great towers of cast limestone rise straight out of the rice fields, draped in vines, hollowed by caves, vanishing and reappearing as the morning mist burns off. For a long time, these places were known only to the villages beneath them. The world is finding them now. Even its smallest creatures carry the culture. In the villages, there is an old pastime built around a beetle, the rhinoceros beetle, a heavy, armored insect with a single curved horn. Two are placed on a log, and the people gather to watch them wrestle, betting quietly on which will hold its ground the longest. It is a small thing, a village amusement, but it says something about a people who learned, long ago, to find patience and contentment in slowness, to sit and watch and wait in a country that has so often had to wait out forces far larger than itself. And it is not one people, but many. Laos counts something close to 50 distinct ethnic groups, and the simplest way the Lao describe them is by altitude. There are the lowland peoples of the river valleys, the rice growers and the city dwellers who have always held the temples and the throne. Above them, on the middle slopes, live older communities who were here before the lowlanders came down to the water. And highest of all, on the cold peaks where almost nothing grows, live the mountain peoples, among them the Hmong, farmers of the steepest ground, with their own language, their own dress, their own gods. A country stacked in layers, each one keeping to its own elevation, bound together by a flag and a river more than by any shared past. It is a fragile kind of unity, and in the war that was coming, the highest layer would be torn from the rest, because the larger forces were always coming. By the late 1800s, the three weak kingdoms of the old Lan Xang had become a prize in a much bigger game. To the west, the kingdom of Siam pressed in. To the east, a new power had arrived by sea, France, building an empire across Indochina. In 1893, France absorbed the Lao lands into its colony, ruling them as a quiet, neglected corner of French Indochina, useful mostly as a buffer against the British in Burma and a frontier against Siam. For 60 years, Laos was governed from Vietnam by men who barely visited it, its borders drawn to serve an empire's convenience rather than its own people. The corridor had changed hands again. The country in the middle was, once more, a thing other powers passed through. Independence came in 1953 as France's empire collapsed across Asia, but independence is not the same as peace. And Laos had the deep misfortune to become free at the precise moment the world was dividing itself in two. A neutral, landlocked, mountainous country sharing a long eastern border with Vietnam. In the calculus of the Cold War, that geography was about to become a death sentence. Look at the map the way a general looked at it in the 1960s. North Vietnam, fighting a war against the South, needs to move soldiers and supplies down the length of the country. But the border between North and South is watched, fortified, impossible. So the supply line bends west, into the mountains of eastern Laos, where the jungle is thick and the terrain is broken, and no one can see what moves beneath the canopy. That hidden network of trails became known to the world as the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and the country it ran through was a country that had asked to be left out of the war entirely. Laos was, by international agreement, neutral. It did not want this fight. It had no quarrel to settle in Vietnam. It simply had the misfortune of lying in between. What happened next is one of the strangest and most consequential chapters of the entire Cold War, and for almost 30 years, the world was not allowed to know it had happened at all. Beginning in 1964, the United States went to war in Laos, not with a declaration, not with soldiers marching across a border. The American public did not know. The American Congress was kept in the dark. It was run by the CIA, financed in secret, fought in the shadow of the larger war next door, and it would come to be known simply as the Secret War. The secrecy was not an accident. It was the design. Because Laos was officially neutral, an open American war here would have shattered the very treaties the United States had signed. So the war was hidden inside the war. The bombers were folded into missions over Vietnam. The men on the ground wore no uniforms and carried papers that listed them as something else. The aircraft were flown, in part, by a civilian airline that belonged quietly to the CIA. For years, when asked, American officials could stand before the cameras and say there was no war in Laos, and, in the narrowest legal sense, be telling the truth. The planes that took off did not exist. The bombs that fell were never dropped. A whole country was being remade by an event that on paper was not happening. The American goal was twofold: to sever the Ho Chi Minh Trail and choke the supplies flowing south, and to hold back the communist Pathet Lao, who were fighting their own war for control of the country. To do it, the United States reached for the weapon it could deploy without putting an army on the ground. It reached for the sky. From 1964 to 1973, American aircraft flew 580,000 bombing missions over Laos. The arithmetic is almost impossible to hold in the mind. It works out to a plane load of bombs dropped on this country every 8 minutes, around the clock, for 9 years. 2 million tons of ordnance fell on a nation the size of Minnesota, more than the United States dropped on Germany and Japan together in the whole of the Second World War. Villages were erased. Hundreds of thousands of people were driven from their homes, forced to live in caves, to farm at night, to bury their dead between the raids. An entire generation grew up knowing the sound of approaching engines before they knew how to read. In the limestone hills of the northeast, near the Vietnamese border, an entire society went underground to survive. In a place called Vieng Shai, the communist leadership and the people around them moved their whole world into a network of caves and lived there, beneath the rock, for the better part of 9 years. There were caves that served as hospitals, caves used as schools, a cave wide enough to hold 1,000 people that became a theater and meeting hall. Weddings were held by lamplight in the stone. Children were born who saw daylight only at night, when it was safe to come out. A nation does not choose to live inside a mountain, it is driven there, and it stays as long as the sky is the enemy. And in those same northern mountains, the war found a people who would pay for it longer than anyone. We have already met them, the Hmong, the highland farmers of the steepest ground, a people apart even within their own country. In the early 1960s, the CIA came to them with an offer: weapons, training, and the promise of refuge if things went wrong, in exchange for soldiers to fight the secret war on the ground. Their leader was a charismatic young officer named Vang Pao. Under his command, tens of thousands of Hmong fighters took up the war the Americans could not be seen to fight, blocking the trail, rescuing downed pilots, holding the line against the North Vietnamese in the high country. From a hidden base called Long Xang, tucked into a valley and absent from every public map, Vang Pao ran an entire secret world. At its height, Long Xang had its own airstrip, its own bank, its own schools, a city of tens of thousands that for a time was the second largest settlement in all of Laos, and one that officially did not exist. When the Americans decided the war was lost, they left. In 1973, a ceasefire was signed next door, and the bombing of Laos finally stopped. The last bombs fall on August the 14th, 1973. After 9 years, the engines go quiet over the mountains. But the quiet was not peace. In 1975, the communist Pathet Lao took the country. The monarchy that had ruled from Luang Prabang for 6 centuries was abolished. The last king of Laos was sent to a re-education camp in the remote northeast, and there he died. No grave was ever marked. And the Hmong, who had fought America's secret war, were left to face the victors alone. The promise of refuge held for some and broke for many. Branded as traitors, they were hunted through the very mountains they had defended. Around 100,000 fled across the Mekong into Thailand, often under fire, often leaving the old and the young behind. Tens of thousands died in the fighting and the flight. Many who survived eventually resettled half a world away, in California, in Minnesota, in Wisconsin, a people scattered from the only mountains they had ever known. Vang Pao led them out and lived the rest of his life in exile in America. He died there, in California, in 2011, an old man far from the high country, mourned by tens of thousands of his people who would never be allowed to go home. For decades, the United States did not officially admit that any of it had happened. The secret war stayed secret. It was the 1990s before the CIA acknowledged the scale of its operation, and the 2000s before the last documents came to light. A war that killed and displaced hundreds of thousands of people had, for a generation, been kept off the record entirely, fought in a country most of the world could not find, against a people most of the world had never heard of. But the bombs do not keep secrets. They are still telling the truth every single year. Of the more than 270 million cluster bomblets dropped on Laos, roughly a third never exploded. They are small, about the size of a tennis ball, and they did not detonate on impact. They simply settled into the rice paddies and the riverbanks and the forest floor and waited. They are still waiting. An estimated 80 million of them remain in the ground today, across all of the country's provinces, half a century after the last plane flew home. Since the bombing ended, more than 20,000 people in Laos have been killed or maimed by these leftover weapons. A farmer striking one with a hoe, a family lighting a cooking fire over buried metal, and again, most often of all, a child, drawn to a small round object in the dirt that looks, for one fatal moment, like something to play with. A majority of the victims, decade after decade, have been children who were born long after the war was supposed to be over. In Vientiane, the capital, there is a visitor center run by an organization that fits survivors with artificial limbs. It is one of the most visited places in the city. Inside, the displays are made from what the war left behind. And outside, in the countryside, the slow, dangerous work of clearing the land goes on, square meter by square meter, where a single team might clear a few hundred meters of contaminated ground in a day. At the current pace, the clearing will not be finished in the lifetime of anyone now alive. The most heavily bombed country in history is still, in the most literal sense, diffusing the war that the world agreed not to see. For the people who live on that ground, the danger is not history. It is a feature of the day, like the weather. A farmer deciding which corner of his field is safe to plow. A mother teaching a child, before they can read, which shapes in the dirt must never be touched. Across the contaminated provinces, clearance teams in heavy visors walk the land in slow lines, sweeping detectors over soil that looks, to any eye, like ordinary earth, flagging each piece of buried metal, then carrying out a controlled detonation that sends a dull thud rolling across the valley. Some of those teams are made up of local women, trained and paid to take apart, one by one, the weapons that fell before they were born. It is the longest cleanup in the world, and it has no end in sight. The war lasted 9 years. The clearing has lasted more than 50 and counting. And here is the cruelest symmetry of all. Those oil drums and bomb casings, the twisted metal that fell from the sky, the people of the highlands gathered it up and built with it. Fences, stilts for their houses, planters, boats, a landscape rebuilt in part out of the very things that had tried to destroy it. Persistence here is not a poem. It is welding a home together from the wreckage of a war you never started. So the war ended, and the country went quiet again. The monks kept walking at dawn. The river kept running. And for a while, the world's attention drifted away entirely, leaving Laos to be exactly what most people had always assumed it was: a small, poor, forgotten place at the edge of the news. But the corridor was never going to stay still. A country in the middle is always wanted by someone. And in the last 20 years, a new power has come into these hills, not from the sky this time, but along the ground. In December of 2021, the first train ran from the Chinese border to the Laos capital. The Laos-China Railway, $6 billion of tunnels and bridges driven straight through the mountains that had isolated this country for its entire history. For the first time, you can travel the spine of Laos at speed, north to the Chinese city of Kunming, south toward Thailand. The slogan the government chose for the new era says everything about how it sees its own geography, from landlocked to land-linked. It is, on its face, the answer to the oldest problem in this story. The corridor that no one could cross finally crossed. The country in the middle finally connected. After 1,000 years of mountains keeping the world out, a tunnel lets it in. But connection has a price, and in Laos, the price is held by the country that built the link. The railway is only part of it. Across the rivers of Laos, dozens of dams have risen, financed largely by Chinese banks, built to turn the falling water of the Mekong and its tributaries into electricity, the centerpiece of a national dream to become what the government calls the battery of Southeast Asia, selling power to its richer neighbors. But the dream outran the demand. The country built far more capacity than the region would buy and borrowed enormous sums to do it. The debt climbed until it surpassed the entire annual output of the economy. To service what it owed, Laos handed control of its own national power grid to a Chinese state company. The cost did not stay on a balance sheet. As the debts came due, the national currency, the kip, began to form, losing much of its value against the money of its neighbors. Prices climbed. The cost of fuel and rice and medicine rose faster than wages could follow, and ordinary families found their savings worth a little less each month. Across the country, young Laotians did what the people of a poor, squeezed land have always done. They left, crossing the river to find work in Thailand, sending money home to villages the new railway was supposed to lift. The trains run on time. The hardship runs underneath them. And along the line, the towns are changing. A place called Vang Vieng, once a small, sleepy town on a green river beneath the karst towers, is now a stop on the railway, its riverbank filling with new hotels and tour buses and visitors arriving from the Chinese border in a matter of hours. The connection the country dreamed of has arrived. The harder question is who it was built to serve and who is merely standing beside the tracks as it passes. Read that slowly. A country bombed into the record books by one superpower in the 20th century has, in the 21st, mortgaged its rivers and its electricity to another. The corridor has a new owner. Different decade, different power. Same country, in the same middle, paying the same old price for lying where it lies. And the dams are the walls that are killing the river's giants. The catfish that can no longer reach its spawning grounds. The dolphin starving in its shrinking pool. The fishery that feeds tens of millions thrown into doubt, so that the lights can stay on in cities that are not Laos. The hunger for power that fell from the sky in the 60s now rises from the riverbed. It wears a different face. It does the same thing. It takes from the country in the middle for the benefit of those passing through. So, what is Laos in the end? It is the only landlocked country in Southeast Asia, the fact that sounds like nothing and turns out to be the key to everything. A land too steep to conquer and too well placed to ignore. The corridor between empires, fought over by the Khmer and the Siamese, colonized by the French, bombed in secret by the Americans, and now wired and indebted to the Chinese. 1,000 years of being the ground that other people's power has to cross. And through all of it, through the kingdoms that rose and split, through the empire that absorbed it, through the 9 years of bombs and the decades of buried ones, the deepest things have held. The monks still leave the monasteries before dawn. The rice is still cooked the night before. The river still runs the length of the country, carrying the same silt it has carried since before there were jars on the plateau or a name for the land of elephants. Stand in Luang Prabang at first light, and you can watch it happen. The line of saffron robes against the grey street, the kneeling figures with their baskets, the handful of rice passed in silence, the way it has been passed for 600 years, in a country that has lost almost everything except this: the discipline of beginning each day again with an act of giving. That is the persistence of Laos, not loud, not triumphant, not a story of a country that won, a story of a country that endured, in the place it could not leave, doing the quiet things it had always done, while the powerful came and went above its head. Whether it can hold on to itself now, between the 80 million bombs still in its soil and the new debts being driven through its mountains, is a question that no one can yet answer. The corridor has been wanted before. It will be wanted again. And the only thing certain about the country in the middle is that the world will keep passing through it, one empire at a time. For now, the river still runs, the monks still walk, and in the highlands, among the broken jars, the oldest mystery and the newest danger lie side by side in the same patient ground, waiting, as Laos has always waited, to see who comes next. Thank you for traveling with us. Until the next journey.